I have my collar and my little pair of scissors, and I've back stitched, so I'm going to trim those down to 1/8 of an inch. I got a little closer down here. That's why sometimes you might want fray check. But I'm trimming it to 1/8 of an inch. When you're trimming in full scale, you're usually trimming down to 1/4 of an inch, but you still get like 1/8 of an inch down there at the collar point. There, now we have more light. And you can see the trimming on that side, but this is what it's going to look like when I'm trimming next to the understitching that I did. And you want to be careful that you're not cutting it off on the back, because that would be easy to do. And if you make a mistake, explain the mistake and how you would do it differently next time, and we're just going to move on from this. Because we want to learn from our mistakes but not get stuck in them. That's what test samples are for. I didn't want to clip my back stitch there because then it would be more difficult. So now that I've trimmed that and edge stitched, usually when you're full scale you can edge stitch a lot further, and if it's on a curve it's possible you could get all the way around it, but not on a point. So I'm turning them outside, and then this area where my understitching is going to hide underneath. And that's why the undercollar is typically smaller, because it hides back under there. And we'll probably see in a minute how that would work if it was done correctly. Okay, so my undercollar right here, if you're looking at it, it's about, I'm trimming it so you can see how wide. It's about 1/16 of an inch too wide. And that's what we should have cut off the outside. Why don't we cut it from the inside? Probably because it makes the neck shape a little weird. But I'm going to close the point on my scissors, and because these aren't so sharp that they'll go through the fabric, I'm just using these little scissors to turn it. And then usually you want to press it with one of those little collar pressing tools. And if I want it to be really pointy, I can take my seam ripper very gently, and I'm not cutting it or seam ripping anything, I'm just using that to pry that out. And I'm thinking maybe a pin would do a better job. But you just keep working with it until you get that little point to come out. And if you chose a curved collar, then it's not an issue. So here I'll have to work a little bit harder at pressing that. I'm going to finger press it just a little bit to get it started so it's easier when I get the iron on it. This area, same. But you want to press it so the stitching line, the side of that stitching line goes under like this, so that the top collar hides the under collar. If this is the under collar and that's the top, you want it to hide. And you can also see this is a thin fabric. If I had made this out of a blanket wool, I would have more underneath that color that I would want to get rid of, which is another good reason for test samples. I mean, if you're sewing one for yourself, maybe you can experiment as you go, but I would sew it out of something cheap first. But if you're manufacturing something and you're going to cut out hundreds of thousands, you want to do this test sample out of the correct fabric and make sure that all of the little problems are worked out before you cut it. Because that's 100,000 mistakes right there on the first one. So you see the way I'm working that out. And if I got a little pin right there, I could maybe pull out that last little bit that's stubborn. But you don't want to do so much that you cut a hole in it either. So that will be ready to press. Okay, so when I get this ready, I'm going to lift this up so that I can put it under here and you can see more of it. So, I've got my back and my fronts and my facing. I've got my top collar, and I want the top collar right side up. And you can see this little clip mark that I have here and the center back of the back body. So I want to pin that right there, and I want the front of my collar to come around and touch right there where that notch is. So you can see where I actually clipped these 3 notches. This is my fold where I've got my extension, and then there's the center front and the mirror image of the center front on the other side. So I want this to line up exactly with the edge of that notch on the stitching line. And I need to find my pins.